I'm a big fan of Mimzy, and she was the producer of a new documentary. Well, it's relatively new, called Women Leaving Islam. And Mimzy Vidz was one of the ex-Muslims featured in the documentary. As soon as I saw it, I knew I had to reach out and have a one-on-one conversation about Islam, about being an ex-Muslim. Mimzy, thank you so much for coming. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really honored to be on your channel, but also particularly because not a lot of people want to speak to ex-Muslims or discuss the issues of within Islam. It's something that a lot of people are afraid to go near, particularly if they're not from sort of the ex-Muslim movement. If they're not actually part of the religion or left the religion, they kind of don't want to go there at all. So I'm just really grateful for you.
Well, thank you for that. I'm interested in why. Why do you think, especially here in the West, we're not seeing as much? I know that mostly here we're dealing with Christianity, Catholicism, etc. So it's front and center, those religions. But beyond that, why do you perceive that people don't want to touch Islam? Are they afraid of being called an Islamophobe, that kind of thing?
Oh, yes. The Islamophobe card loves to be drawn out, which makes things very, very tricky for people. The thing is, it gets really complicated because people, for some reason, equate it to kind of even like racism, which doesn't make any sense. The term Islamophobia creates a lot of confusion because you criticizing the religion and criticizing the people are very different things, but they're kind of merged into one by using this sort of term. So it becomes very touchy. People feel, as I said, particularly I feel like people that aren't Muslim or, from sort of the Western background, they will feel like it's racism. As I said, I mean, I've been called a racist as well, just talking about Islam. It just doesn't make any sense at all because we're not talking about races here. We're talking about a religion. We're talking about an ideology. So there is a lot of confusion around there. But because of that confusion, people are just too afraid to, especially now, I feel like now there's sort of a lot of wokeness and people are being called out a lot more online and social media, and so it's kind of, they kind of tiptoe around it.
Like, I'm a white guy, right? So white Oklahoman. If I was to embrace Islam, how could Islam as an idea be a racial thing? It doesn't really make any sense, right? You see people across the color spectrum who hold to the Qur'an and believe in Allah. So the idea that being criticized as somehow an indictment of skin color or racial discrimination, it doesn't really wash. I wanted on the record, by the way, that our entire conversation today is going to be haram. I would like, if you would, Mimzy, to explain haram to all of us here in the West. Haram, halal, what are we talking about when someone says that's haram?
Right. So haram basically just means forbidden. So it's something that isn't allowed, by religious standards. What's allowed and not allowed can be debated, obviously, within the religion, though. So you will find various points of view, of course. And then there is actually kind of a spectrum. So there are things in between that. So things that are frowned upon. But haram means absolutely forbidden. And then halal is basically that it's allowed. So that's something that is allowed and usually thought of as a good thing to do.
Okay, well, I mean, pork is the easy one, right? Don't eat pork. But I mean, give me some specific examples of something that was haram when you were in the faith.
So something actually, I just mentioned that there are things that are sort of debated on, but I grew up around people that were very kind of more on the stricter spectrum. Not my family, though. My family were a little bit more relaxed, but the people that were in my community and my school, I went to a Muslim school, by the way, and they were super, super strict. And so, for example, they would have said music is haram. And yeah, that's something that's kind of debated, as I said. But, music kind of, incites
I'm
haram
sorry,
things.
forgive the interruption.
Yeah.
All music? Like all music?
There's one exception, and that's drums. And that's only because there was one incident where the Prophet Muhammad was at a wedding and he made a comment about, let's play some drums. So they're like, okay, drums are allowed. And that's it. So everything else, particularly like string instruments and flutes and things, that they're actually like the devil's work. They call the devil, not only are they the devil's work, they call the devil. So if you play music, they call the devil. And there's actually a specific hadith, which is the sayings of the Prophet, if anyone doesn't know, that says, those people that listen to music in hellfire, they will have hot lead poured into their ears. So yeah, it's quite an extreme thing. You'll get more relaxed Muslims that will flip that around though and be like, oh, it's more about music that is about bad things or negative things or like naughty things. But nice music's all right.
That's a subjective series of terms. What qualifies as naughty and nice, right?
Exactly. Well, exactly.
So in the documentary, you were talking about how you were kind of trying to be the hip, cool Muslim. You wore the hijab back a little bit and, you're being, this is a terrible comparison, but it reminds me of contemporary Christian pastors in the United States. And in order to be accessible and hip and cool, they walk out and they're wearing the skinny jeans and they've got the cross tattoo and the earring, I think it's an appeal to the culture. You very much were doing that in your own life. Was it like Islam light, or was it, how would you describe what you were doing?
I think that's perfect. Islam light sounds really good. There is a movement within Islam. I don't know if movement's the right word. There is I don't really know what to call it. It's sort of a sect, I guess. It's Sufism, and Sufism is quite well known. I know like Oprah did like a whole like series about Sufism, which I thought was interesting. But essentially, actually, I think there are actually some non-Muslims that are Sufi. But basically, Sufism is this sort of spiritual, way more. I mean, if you think of Christianity, like I don't know if they have this in the US, but like Quakers, like they're just like way more like chill and cool, and they're kind of that equivalent, I'd say.
Our Quakers are not, but I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Totally okay, they're not a thing. Okay, but yeah, they're like everything's just a metaphor. Like it might say that music's haram, but it just means that like. Like they'll just take it. They'll be like, oh, it's not real music. They mean like music like from the devil. Like they'll just twist everything. And I wasn't always like that, like Islam light. I kind of started to question things and then thought, well, Islam light seems so much nicer and made more sense to me at that time. I felt like the violent things weren't great in the Qur'an or, in our religious texts. And the way that Sufism kind of spun them just made it feel better, to put it bluntly. That's kind of why I did that. So, I went to university. That was really the time that I kind of became this like cooler version. And I wanted to fit in at university. I wanted to be like normal but at the same time be my religion, right? And do the things I'm supposed to do. So I kind of, just tried to present Islam in a sort of really cool way. And even simple things that I'm not supposed to do at all as a Muslim, like going to bars. I didn't drink, but you're not actually supposed to even go to a bar or any place that serves alcohol at all. But I remember being like, well, I'll just go there like with my friends, with my hijab that was back, which like, it doesn't fit at all. And just, I kind of made it in my head that I thought to myself, maybe like I'm bringing these people closer to the religion because they'll like get to know it through me. So maybe it's not that bad.
Is that really what you're thinking though? I mean, as part of you're like, I get to go to the bar, right? Come on. Was there any of that going on? Like, I'm here as a missionary. But I mean, it had to have been kind of a kick to bend or even break the rules, right? Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to think back to what was my thought process. It's a while now, but... Well, I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. If it was me, I'd be like, oh, I'm here doing the Lord's good work. But if I was being honest with myself, I'd be like, I'm having a good time, kind of thing. So.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there was a little bit of that, but I think I was also okay with. It's weird. I was kind of in a conflict. I think a lot of people are especially when they're leaving. I kind of felt really passionate about my religion though at that time as well. So it's kind of contradictory, but I felt like, what I was doing was okay. And, religious people have this thing, I felt like at the time, that I was told, fear God. We're told that a lot as Muslims, like fear Allah, like constantly, like do you have fear in you? And I'm like, I never had fear. I was always like, no, I'm all about love. Like I'm such a hippie now, but I was like a hippie then even. And it was like, I'm doing everything from love, so I feel like God loves me. I sounded more like a Christian, to be honest. And I was like, God doesn't mind. Like, I'm also, side note, also related to the Prophet Muhammad, like very distantly, obviously. He's my distant relative. We have like a big family tree. And so I felt like we were connected too. So I was like, he'll be cool with me. He's my great, 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 great granddad. So I kind of felt like I had like get me out of jail card.
So now if you look at him, I mean, I don't know how else to say this, Mimzy, but I mean, Muhammad, the child molester, right? I mean, if we're going to get into the Qur'an and the 6-year-old marrying the child and consummating it, raping the child at 9. And you had spoken about how you had sort of created a series of rationalizations in your own mind to get around that. When you were in Islam, right? They came and they said, oh my God, he raped a child. And your way through that was what?
Well, it changed. So first I was told about that actually in those times, they were older. So Muslims say all kinds of things actually for this. But one of the things that they say is that it was so long ago that, a 9 or 6-year-old is a child now, but it wasn't a child then. I remember being told that and I thought, okay, I'll take that. And then later on I was like, oh, I don't know. But actually there is a big belief out there, and a lot of modern sort of Muslims are wanting to believe this, that she wasn't 6 or 9, and that was sort of a metaphor. They love these metaphors. So what they say is, obviously the hadith literally says 6 and 9, but what they meant was she was just very pure and very young and very immature, but actually she was 16. So there is that belief out there.
So it was like she had a childlike heart, the innocence of childhood kind of thing?
Right. And the only way, and the reason that was done, and I won't go into all the details, I'll just bore you guys, but the reason that was done was because another wife, was it another wife? I think another wife was accused of adultery. And so Bukhari is basically the guy who wrote the sayings of the Prophet. So he specifically wrote 6 and 9 because he wanted to be like, she never slept with anyone else, like to make that point that she was not an adulteress, but it's not about the age. But yeah, there's a lot of writings on this. So I, for a long time, sorry, I just hit my mic, but I, for a long time, believed that. And I ran with that. I was like, this makes me feel a lot better. Thinking that she was a lot older. They also have another sort of evidence that they use, like she fought in a war or helped in a war, and the women only fight in a war if they're of a certain age. I think she would have had to been 21. So, I mean, I think even Haris Sultan, who's another ex-Muslim on YouTube, I think it was him. Don't kill me, Haris, if I got this wrong. But someone else actually said that, they fully believe that she probably was older, and that the person that wrote the hadiths made that mistake. So yeah, there is other beliefs out there. But I mean, I have no idea. I don't doubt that in that time they did things like that. So who's to say, really? How will we ever know?
All of a sudden it hits you like a sledgehammer, I'm guessing, when you finally had the realization that it's a child. Did it happen like that?
Yeah. I mean, maybe not like a sledgehammer. I feel like everything was very gradual, because when you're indoctrinated from a young age, I mean, I knew 6 and 9 from when I was 6 and 9, like I knew what had happened from when I was so young. So you don't see things sort of from a different perspective. Well, I didn't anyway, very suddenly. It's kind of, for me, it was quite a gradual realization of like, actually, that's not great if that happened,
We do. You were talking about how you had sort of skipped over or omitted or excused some of the darker parts of the Qur'an. We do that all the time with the Christian Bible. Slavery in the Old Testament. Well, it was indentured servanthood, or it was a different time, or that we found ways to get around genocide, wiping out the city of 500,000 and killing pregnant women and the kidnapping of virgins. It's amazing the acrobatics that's sort of this apologetics culture. Religions have an amazing number of defense mechanisms. Islam certainly no exception, right?
Oh, 100%. Oh my God, the acrobatics, gymnastics. I mean, it's just crazy what they can get around. I mean, yeah, slavery is a big one. I feel like for me, that was definitely one of the big ones, because I hadn't registered that for me, because as I said, the age thing, that's something I kind of knew for a long time. But actually the slavery thing is something Muslims kind of like just kind of skip over. They're like, I remember, as I mentioned earlier, I went to a Muslim school. So like they literally went through scripture with us every day. That was like next to maths and science and everything. Like we did Islamic studies. And it was like, they'd read a verse and be like, oh yeah, and then the slaves, and it's like, you never kind of noticed it until I was like, wait, that says slave. In fact, there's a verse that says, and I never noticed it, and I've read that verse so many times, it says, what the right hand possess. So that's how it refers to a slave, what the right hand possess. So men can sleep with their wives and what their right hand possess. So they possess these women. And then there's a sort of little footnote that says, oh, the slaves. And I read that so many times, not knowing what the hell that right hand, I thought it was like their possessions. I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. I don't really get it. If they had like vibrators or something at that time, I don't know. But yeah, and then it occurred to me like much later, like, oh, they're talking about like real people, like as a possession next to their wives. It was so bizarre. That was like, blew my mind. And that's definitely something that if you speak to an average Muslim, they'll be like, what? Slaves aren't allowed? No, like they don't know.
I was struck by, I'm trying to think if I heard it in the documentary or somewhere else, and this is probably certainly true in some Islamic cultures, but how easy it is for a man to divorce the woman as opposed to how hard it is for the woman to get out. And I think, was it that the man can simply say talaq or something like that? Talaq, talaq, talaq. There was a series of words. Please correct me, forgive my ignorance. But can you speak to this sort of double standard? Like if the husband gets tired of the wife, I'll see you later. He just essentially kicks her to the curb, right?
Absolutely. And there's massive double standards. And yeah, this is something else. So when I was going on my journey, I kind of was just going through all these different things bit by bit, and then being like, hold on. There's like so many things here. But yeah, that was a big one. So the rules on divorce are, a man can say talaq, which means I divorce you basically 3 times, and then you're divorced. That's literally it. But for a woman, she can't do that. She has to get permission. Firstly, usually what actually happens, like in real kind of life, is she says to the guy, like, can you divorce me because I want a divorce? That can happen. Very often, I've heard so many stories of the guys being like, no, like, I'm going to make this hard for you. Because their only other option then is to go to an imam or a sheikh or which is like, the priest basically, or it can be like sort of a local, it has to be a dude, or it has to be a guy though, but just sort of, someone that they can trust. And she has to go to him and say, I want to divorce my husband can you give me permission, basically? So this guy will then come into the household, discuss with the husband, see what the situation is. And then if he decides it's okay, then she can divorce him. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I never realized that. So yeah, that was quite shocking.
Sounds like a couple of guys deciding if they want to sell a car. I mean, when
Right.
you look at it in that context, it's pathetic. As I understand it, in many Islamic courts, there need to be two female witnesses for a single male witness. I don't know how common that is. Is that, something you're familiar with?
No, not at all. And that's another thing I've always known. I've always known that as a young kid, if someone's getting married, there's always either two men, but if it's women, it has to be, double the amount. And I kind of was like, hold on. When I looked into it, the Prophet had said it's because in case the woman forgets. And I was like, if anyone forgets, I swear it's men. Like, because women remember everything. But yeah, so I find that really bizarre. But yeah, and then it's just, there's actually another saying that's linked to that as well, where the Prophet Muhammad says, women are less in intellect. And that was like a proper stab in the heart. Like, you're like, oh man, like I loved this guy and he's just literally said that I'm dumb. And then he said, a woman was like, well, why are women sort of less in intellect? And he didn't actually give a reason. He just said, well, yeah, that's why you have to have double witnesses, basically. Then that's just kind of the case. So, so it's really hard. I actually love throwing that one out when I'm having discussions with Muslims, because it's really hard to get around that one. Just him kind of straight up being like, yeah, women are dumb.
So, by the way, I'm talking here with Mimzy Vidz, who is a former Muslim, also a life coach and counselor, and I want to talk about that. But you're being very generous to entertain me here and on the show and educate all of us about so much of this. You have a great story. I'm going to beg you to tell it again. You're on the beach, you're wearing the burkini, and you have a moment of epiphany. So start at the beginning. Tell me the story of you on the beach wearing the burkini and what happened.
Yeah, so I was on holiday with my uni friends and, or if you're American, college friends. I was, on a beach wearing a bikini. I was obviously hijabi that time, wearing the full hijab. My friends were in bikinis. And I was in Italy, by the way. So I realized in that moment that I just realized that I was all covered. I was getting kind of the weird looks, but also just the idea of, these women not wearing a lot of clothes and the men not being these sort of like crazy animals. Like, it was just normal. Everyone just seemed normal, which I know seems weird because I actually am brought up in England, but it's just the realization of like, why am I covering when actually I'm actually getting more looks anyway. But I thought the whole point of the hijab and covering was sort of this protection from men, as if men are like going to pounce on you if they see a little bit of, wrist or something. So this kind of notion of actually not wearing like barely anything when you're in a bikini, and it just being like okay and normal. And I felt like you're being respected and there's this, difference. And I realized, coming from an Arab background, so I'm part Egyptian and part Moroccan, and I'm very familiar with the Arab world in general anyway, traveling across there, and actually even South Asia, I've traveled quite across there as well. So being in Muslim countries, the men are very different there, and, harassment of women is really normal. So I kind of thought, that's really weird. How does that work? Where the West, they wear less clothes and are respected more. And then in these Muslim countries where we're supposed to have this form of protection for the point of being protected and not being harassed, we're actually being harassed more. That just occurred to me in that moment. And I thought, if God had been like, guys, I've got a great plan. If women cover up, you will be protected, and be pure, and, you know, it will help society as a whole, then it's not worked, because he's created this sort of, I mean, I from my experience of Muslim men in these countries particularly, they sort of, you know, it becomes more of a sort of mystery. It becomes more of this sort of like, we need to,
it's like a forbidden fruit kind of thing, right?
Well, exactly. But also there's this concept of sort of slut shaming as well, that, you know, it becomes intertwined with the hijab, because if you're not wearing hijab, or if you're wearing, you know, slightly tight, even if you're wearing hijab, but slightly tight fitting clothes, you're not doing it accurately or correctly as they would expect you to, then you're a slut, then you're asking for it. Why would you dress like that? Why would you break the rules? Clearly you want a man's attention, because that's what it's associated with now. Your body, you know, is just for that purpose, so you have to just cover it up.
Okay,
so, yeah.
Well, this is complicated. And if I say something wrong, it's a problem of ignorance. Okay, I don't mean to insult anybody. I just want to understand. Okay.
Yeah.
So the thinking was that there's a kind of moral anarchy that will take place if a woman shows too much of her body, right?
Right.
So you were covering up to protect men from lust, something along those lines. Is that accurate?
Yeah, protect. I think I would say more myself, but yeah, I think it's
like to not be the temptress that might lead the man astray. Was there some of that going on?
Right, I think that's the.
And so your experience was actually that that it was the covering that drew more attention, and you became more conspicuous in a model where you were trying to sort of blend more in and not draw attention to yourself. The opposite was true. But then you speak about many of these men in the Egyptian culture, et cetera, the Egyptian Islamic culture, who do live in a culture of objectification, dehumanization, you know, females as property, harassment, that kind of thing. It's a very complex sort of web that we're navigating here, because for them, if they see an ankle or a wrist or eyes or a forehead or something like that, I mean, that is, I hate the word trigger, but you know what I'm trying to say, Mimzy? I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
No, that you said it really well, actually. I think you know, that's exactly it. It's sort of, you know, they just, as I said, they kind of just associate you showing it. That's why you know, ex-Muslims often talk about it as this sort of slut shaming, because, you know, the shame is such a big theme here as well. You know, because it's sort of like, you know, you're supposed to be wearing like a tent, really, and not showing anything. I mean, that's I'm not really
laughing
ideal.
At the concept, but your description is, it looks like an umbrella stand on some of these people.
Right.
Yeah, I get
right. That. I mean, that's kind of ideal scenario for a lot of people, because even sort of jeans can be a bit too tight for some people, you know. But yeah, so it's just this idea of, if you aren't sort of covering, then you're asking for it. There's a lot of that, and you'll see that, you know, as I said, I grew up in the West, but within an Arab, well, I would say within a Muslim community, because we've got sort of Asian, South Asians as well. So within a very sort of big London Muslim community, and there is very much of that sort of slut shaming even here, and it's even more so back home, you know, back in the
I'm
Arab
also
country.
interested in how they come after you as an ex-Muslim. If you know, I've seen the death threats for somebody like, I don't know, Ali Rizvi, et cetera, you know, these people have come out. But when it comes to a female, it's, I can't even imagine. It seems almost always to drift into a threat of sexual violence.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, almost without fail. And it's so prevalent. I don't know. Can you speak to why specifically that brand of threat is the one thrown at a female apostate, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, it's very much linked to what we're kind of talking about. You know, this idea of you know, women and what their place should be. You know, these men are often indoctrinated into believing that, the Prophet said things like it's better for a woman to stay at home, women are supposed to be covered, are supposed to be modest, and that's what they associate with purity and goodness. And the opposite of that, suddenly gets this sort of attack. And as you said, it can be sexual. I mean, I got so much. I still get emails to this day, and I'm not even active on as much as I was. But I still get these emails, and they're all kind of about sort of raping me and what's going to happen. It all becomes really sexual, because that's the expectation almost of like, well, if you're not fitting into this category of covered and modest, then you must be a slut and you must be, shamed, and that's sort of the alternative. But, a woman's place ultimately is below a man anyway. So, men have the power basically. And you see this even with the fact that men discipline their wives. In the Qur'an, it talks about how a man should discipline his wife. So, I mean, the way that the women are described, actually, I've said it on my channel before that I think it's almost like their children. Like it's a very bizarre sort of relationship, but there is this hierarchy. But actually, I'll just explain the verse about disciplining women. So it says that, if your wife is being disobedient, then, first of all, stop talking to her. And if that doesn't work, then second of all, leave her bed. And if that doesn't work, then you can hit her. Obviously, there are disagreements about sort of how hard you can hit her. Some people say sort of only hit her with a feather or something. But
Wow.
Obviously, especially nowadays, people are like, oh, it doesn't really mean hit. It just means like shake, or like, I don't know. People really try and kind of spin that around. But if you know Arabic, you know that it literally says, hit. It doesn't say anything outside of that. It says hit her.
I was talking to Sarah Hayder, another ex-Muslim, about repression cultures and how, as they preach on the surface about all the stuff that is forbidden, it is haram. When the lights are off, when they're deep in their basements, when nobody's looking, they're doing all the shit that they're telling everybody else that they don't do and that they shouldn't do. So I'm thinking to myself, and I mean, I don't know how much you would know about this, but being kind of an activist and outspoken ex-Muslim, you feel like that there's a lot of, I don't know, porn use and a lot of the, using drugs, eating pork, maybe. I don't know. Is there a lot of that kind of stuff that happens once the doors are closed, sort of an underground of haram going on?
For sure. Everything except the pork. It's like you'll see these young Muslims being like, yeah, I've got a girlfriend, I'm sleeping with her, I'm drinking alcohol, but no, I'll never have pork.
Not
like
the
pork
pork.
is haram.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, you definitely see that, of course. And I know that there's a lot of underground things for sure, more so with men for some reason, from my experience, because of the way that they're brought up, and because it's very clear even in the scriptures that men have the power and men are more flexible. You find that even how parents bring up their children, boys are allowed to go out, girls not so much. So you'll find kind of boys rebelling, but also in Islam there's something really handy. If you mess up and just mess about, you can get all your sins wiped if you go on Hajj, which is the like holy pilgrimage. So I remember even when I was growing up, a lot of youngsters are like, yeah, but then I'm just going to go on Hajj and then I'll be really good. So yeah, you see a lot of that.
That's the pilgrimage to Mecca, which I think every Muslim's supposed to do at least once in their life. Aren't there millions of people who get there, who go and walk around the, what did they call the centerpiece?
Kaaba.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question about, you live in the UK currently, is that right?
I do, yeah.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the impression that there are concerns about these microcosms of sort of mini Islamic nations that are happening throughout the UK. What's happening is you are seeing bubbles of Islamic culture that are not assimilating. And I'm not meaning that they give up their values or don't have the right to believe the way they want to believe, but they're rejecting the rule of law. They adhere only to Muslim law. They essentially are creating little Islamic states within and throughout the UK. Is that a legit concern, or is that just fabricated or something else?
I don't know about it, like not listening to the laws of like this country.
Okay.
I know that Islamically, there, you know, obviously you get the kind of extremists, that are real extremists who kind of do crazy things, but Islamically, actually, you're supposed to abide by the law of the land you're living in. So there is kind of scripture on that. Obviously, making sure that it's aligned with whatever you believe in. So,
okay, fair enough.
But you know, but there definitely is a lot of sort of Muslim bubbles, 100%. I mean, I was in a Muslim bubble. I didn't know a non-Muslim, and I lived in, you know, London, so it's kind of ridiculous. I never hung out with a non-Muslim. The only non-Muslims I knew were like on TV. So definitely the you know, I think it's very different in like America and even Canada. Like there's a lot more sort of diversity, but here, because there's so many, and there's a lot of South Asians, particularly, you know, in sort of certain parts of the north particularly, you'll find that schools are like 92, 98% South Asian Muslims, you know, like the whole school. It's not even a Muslim school, it's like just a normal school, but they're all Muslims because they all kind of come together and crowd together and stick together. But there's also an Islamic belief that you shouldn't be too close of a friend to a kafir, which is, you know, a non-believer. So, you know, you're not supposed to mix with people too often that could lead you astray, basically.
You spoke in the documentary about conversation with your husband. Hey, I'm not sure I buy this anymore. I don't think I'm a Muslim anymore. I don't know. Are you comfortable talking a little bit about that? I mean, what's that moment like? You're saying the words out loud. He's still a Muslim, right? I mean, what happened?
Yeah. I mean, it was weird because, you know, it's a very weird thing to say. But having said that, though, it was a long time coming. I mean, it took me a long time to get there. I think a lot of people kind of like did their research, or people I know, they kind of like, you know, did their research and they went, oh, this doesn't make sense. But I mean, I was researching deeply and questioning deeply for years up until that point, and really questioning, you know, kind of like, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense. But spinning it for so long as well. But so was my husband. So we kind of were doing it together as well. You know, he was very much looking into kind of the science of, you know, scientific things and kind of questioning that and whether science matches up with religion, with Islam. And I was looking into kind of women's issues and that sort of thing. And so we'd come together and have these kind of discussions like, oh, you know what, did you know that, like, you can hit me if I'm disobedient? Like, you know, things would come up and we'd discuss it. So, you know, it wasn't a sort of massive shock. We had been discussing it for a long time, but it was just kind of uncomfortable. I felt suddenly really alone, which I know is a weird thing to say because obviously I had my husband, but I felt like I was suddenly on this island of like everyone around me was Muslim, and then I suddenly like was like, oh, I don't know if I believe anymore. So yeah, it can be quite lonely actually.
May I ask about his journey? Still a Muslim?
Yeah. So his journey of leaving.
I mean, did he leave? Is he?
He did. Sorry. Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, he did. So he did. I mean, we both kind of questioned it, and then I was kind of the first one to jump. But then he kind of found the courage a little bit later on. But yeah, so he was religious as I was. We both were. We married as Muslims, obviously, and we both were really like passionate about it. We both actually were part of the Islamic Society at our university, which, you know, we were very much involved, kind of doing dawah, which is basically spreading the word. So we both were really, really involved. So yeah, and then not that long after, to be honest, he kind of was like, yeah, I think I agree.
So then the next step is, hey, mom, dad, or have you told mom and dad in that way?
So my situation is a little bit more confusing because actually my dad is also an ex-Muslim, but and he left kind of a while before me. But my mum is very religious, but my dad, when I was Muslim, I kind of didn't really talk to him as much, which I know is horrible, but that's kind of what happens when you become an ex-Muslim and you're still Muslim. You kind of don't mix as much. We're similar to kind of Jehovah's Witnesses in that way. I know that that's what happens there. But, you know, yeah, so I kind of didn't speak to my dad as much as you know, as you would. But yeah, my mum's super, super religious. So with my dad, I definitely kind of came to him and was like, oh yeah, I don't believe either. And then with my mum, I kind of had that conversation as well. Like, I think it came up in the conversation. I was like, yeah, I don't really believe that. I don't think that's true. And then eventually I was like, oh yeah, I don't believe in any of it. And my mum basically, to this day, believes that I have black magic on me, and that's why I don't believe. And that's a really common thing to kind of magic and sorcery and that sort of thing is really part of Islam. You know, the Prophet had black magic on him. It's quite a big thing in the religion. So my mum just thinks that must be the reason.
So it's not my daughter. She is being controlled by a dark spirit.
Exactly. I mean, someone actually kind of confirmed it for her, and I met with him, and he was like, yeah, you're possessed. I was like, okay.
Oh, that's good information to have.
Yeah.
Mimzy, Vidz, you've been very kind and generous with your time. Real fast, you are a life coach. You've got a YouTube channel. You speak about Islam, about other things. I don't know, sum it up for me. Give me kind of a profile of what you do as, can I call you an activist? I mean, what's a good word for what you do?
Yeah, I'm an activist, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I just started a YouTube channel when I when I left Islam. In fact, a lot of people found out I'd left Islam through my YouTube channel. I just made a video why I left Islam and then just posted it everywhere. Mainly because I found that ex-Muslims, you know, there needs to be more kind of conversations about this, about people leaving, because you don't really hear about it as much. And as I said, the whole kind of normalizing this sort of dissent from Islam needs to happen more. So that was why. So yeah, I've got a YouTube channel where I discuss religion and that sort of thing. And I'm also a counselor and life coach. Yes. So I do work a lot with ex-Muslims. As you can imagine, ex-Muslims, I mean, I kind of briefly touched on it, but very often, they're either threatened with death, but they're also, a lot of the time in the West, they're kind of have to leave their homes, and awful things happen to ex-Muslims just because they don't believe in the religion anymore. So,
there must also be an assimilation challenge, right? They're entering a culture they have been taught for so long was haram or forbidden or evil or covered in black magic. And now they're being introduced to it from a different perspective and wondering what to do first. And
so, they're coming into a culture that is, that was forbidden for them. They couldn't do certain things. And it's such a big culture shock for many people that they don't know how to handle it. And but also just you lose your whole identity almost, because Islam is all consuming. It's not just a religion, it's a way of life. That's what's always on the brochures. It's kind of, it's who you are. So, for many people, they get this sort of identity crisis as well. Who am I if I'm not a Muslim anymore? And so, there's a lot of complexities with kind of leaving Islam. Obviously the family aspect, their own personal aspect, the community, and as I said, for many people, it's really a life or death situation, because there is a death penalty when it comes to apostates. And within the Muslim culture, there is this big sort of issue with honor as well, kind of honor culture, that you have to honor your family and honor your religion. And and I mentioned shame is a big one. So if you bring shame on the family, there definitely is this sort of, the family need to then take it into their hands and punish you. However, there's a whole scale of what that punishment involves, but often the families feel it's their duty to punish you, and that's what God would have wanted. They take it upon themselves to decide now what to do with you. So it can be very, very, very traumatic and scary.
I think just being able to see your face and hear your voice for so many people who are struggling, trying to rationalize or reason their way out of unreasonable beliefs, they find encouragement, and they realize they're not alone. And that's why I think what you do is so critical and important. I'm going to include the link to your YouTube channel and to the Women Leaving Islam documentary. That'll be in the description box. We'll send some people your direction. And in the meantime, just thank you. Thanks for the work you do. Thanks for your activism. Thanks for if I need some good life coaching, I'm calling you. We'll talk. We'll do the thing.
Perfect.
And hopefully we'll get a chance to speak again soon. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.